Hello and welcome along. You are here with Media Matters for another week. Maree and Marty bringing you what we think and have seen, what's caught our eye in the media this week, and the odd thing or two that has not. Marty Gibson, how are you? Welcome along.
Good, thanks. Yeah, good. Yeah. Yeah, the things that have us sitting bolt upright in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning going, oh my God.
I know. Gosh, I know. There has been, well, yeah, it's been an interesting old time. Now, look, I just having a look because we mentioned last week, we talked about last week about how we felt that a number of political parties hadn't quite got the memo that it was an election year. And to be generous, we felt that it was potentially because of the budget. National is very much concentrating on that with Nicola Willis. But, you know, New Zealand First have been banging a drum and latterly act for a wee while. Labour has been very much missing in action. However, I think they might have listened to us, Marty, because things have certainly ramped up this week. Nicola Willis did another pre-budget announcement. The detail isn't quite there yet, but it is just definitely putting a finger in the wind and to let people know the direction, and that is around public service cuts. Marty, have you caught any of the sort of the wind, any of the vibe about in the media around how they felt even before the announcement was made in terms of these supposed cuts from Nicola Willis?
Yeah, it's amazing how they can frame it as just these deadly cuts, and they always use the services New Zealanders rely on, or the services New Zealanders depend on. And I know it's national say the services New Zealanders expect. But yeah, I mean, the fact that the cuts are a fraction of the increase that we saw under Labour. Again, so there was the New Zealand Herald story about the Public Service Association is labelling the Finance Minister's plan to cut more roles as an act of willful destruction, with thousands of public sector jobs on the line. Now, just to put that in perspective, what she's talking about, Willis said the public service comprised about 1% of the total population, at about 48,000 when the last Labour government took office in 2017, in coalition with New Zealand First for the first few terms. So you're seeing they're starting to, there's a little bit of argy-bargy there. In December last year, the workforce comprised 63,000, just shy of 1.2% of the population. 20% increase. Increasing the public sector headcount by a third in 6 years had allowed the sector's headcount to go out of whack, Willis said. Willis would not give a figure for how many public servants she wanted to cut, but said the workforce needed to drop below 60,000. So it's gone up from 48,000 to 63,000. She wants to get it down to 60. And the Public Service Association is saying that's an act of willful destruction.
I know. I mean, look, I guess a union gun a union, aren't they? I mean, that's what they're there for. But really?
You'd hope for a bit of balance. You'd hope for someone, the taxpayers union would have been good for this. Just, hey, we need to pay less tax to fund these smugly puffs.
Yeah, I mean, one of the stuff headlines was Willis sacrificed women for her last budget and public servants for this one, says Labour.
Yeah.
And I even heard on ZB after all of this, and I think it was one of the union representatives, or it may have been one of the politicians, but they were opining about, we're going to see, are we going to see border workers and things come across our border and our biosecurity threatened? I mean, she's been very clear. This is not about frontline services. And she's even outlined all the services that are not going to be affected. This is essentially the six-figure, or very highly paid graduate creche for, young'uns with their freshly minted comms degrees and BAs, that's where the cuts are going to hit. I mean, if you're currently sitting year 3 or year 4 into a degree at Victoria University with a hope and vision and dream of going into the public service once you get out, you might want to start looking at other career
Well,
options, methinks.
cutting it from 63 to 60, there's still going to be plenty of make work jobs for the ladies and, the other people who can't compete by doing something that adds enough value that someone will pay money that they've earned to buy it.
Mm.
It's got to be taken at gunpoint. And, I mean, the extent to which New Zealand's public debt, we'll come to this later on, has gone up since 2017. I mean, there doesn't seem to be the foundation of numeracy to allow people to see that it can't happen. And there's not anyone within Nationals Comchic's coterie who can phrase it in terms that New Zealanders understand, which is like, hey, if you spank your credit card and piss it up against a wall, eventually you not only don't have the credit to spend money that you haven't earned, you got to pay back the money that you've spent that you didn't earn. And so it's a double whammy. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to hurt. But eventually, if you can kind of gird your loins and punch through it, things will get better. And, I mean, I always talk about the people who print money. There's an unholy alliance between them and politicians who can go, oh, I'm being so generous and kind, the services New Zealanders rely on, I can do this and that. And everyone's going to be happy because I'm going to be in another bullshit cushy job for Otago University by the time we have to pay it back.
Yeah. I did my once a week, watch the first 15 minutes of One News
How'd you go?
last night. Well, look, it was what I expected. But of course, this story led, as you would expect. So it led. It was the tile run comments from Christopher Hipkins, which, being a Tuesday night, had me spitting my ice water across the room, just as well it wasn't a Friday. He stood there, straight-faced, in all seriousness, saying
Those little
how
bloody beady eyebrows like that.
saying how irresponsible this was, because this was affecting people's livelihoods. This was taking away their jobs. They had mortgages. They had families that they had to support. They were then going to be put into impossible situations by this government. And I was sitting there going, wow. Oh, the political amnesia, Christopher, when you actually put thousands and thousands of New Zealanders in that situation in late 2021, and they were considered by your colleague a river of filth.
Yeah. I mean, the teachers' unions have had a long march through the institutions to make people dumb enough to vote for that little ginger fop. That's not libelous, is it? I hope not. I know we're going to be more careful.
But it was just the no lack of irony. Like, I mean, people that are completely, I guess, who are in the public service.
You did a double negative there. It was the lack of irony.
The lack of irony. He's not. Look, his supporters, those that were sitting inside of the tent that thought everybody that were turned up to the protest who were mandated out, who weren't part of the team of 5 million, that would have passed them by, would have sailed over their heads. It would have been, these are not the droids that you're looking for. But for, I think, a great number of New Zealanders to hear stuff like that come out of his mouth, even like, let's park for a moment all of the COVID stuff. And even let's just look at it, as you said before, about the spanking of the credit card and the fiscal effects of the policy of him and his mate Squealer and Jacinda during that period of time, and the effect that it had on businesses, the effect that it had on families, the pro-inflationary squeeze that all of those families felt. Maybe they were caught up in a redundancy for a business closure. I mean, those people, I would have thought, if they had been affected like that, if they've got shit on their shoe and they're still feeling it and smelling the stench of that previous Labor government following them around, if I'd heard that on the 6 o'clock news from Chris Hipkins, I wouldn't have been thrilled either. I mean, and but then the blindness from the man who was also this week turned around and said, "Oh yeah, I think Auckland has moved on since the COVID lockdowns."
Yeah, with all the efficiencies that there've been from the Industrial Revolution and the gain in technology that's followed it, our life should be easy. But if life's easy, people have got time to keep refining things where they recognize, well, we could kind of get together and make our life better still and have more freedom. So we're being squeezed by that huge amount of money. I think it's about $9 billion that we have to pay back a year from Squealer's Billions, which is up from $3 billion. And you can do a lot with $1 billion. If you're functionally enumerate, it seems like a subtle distinction, but it's huge. And there is that desire to create dependency, the services New Zealanders rely on. And there are a willing portion of the population who are willing to nibble at that bait in the trap, which is everything bad that happens to you is someone else's fault. It's an intoxicating proposition. It's far easier to swallow than, you know what, however unfair things are, there are things that I could do better. I'm going to do them better. That's where we've got to be.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
have the capacity to lead, make things better in your own neighborhood. And don't wait for people to fix things for you. And I think we're at the point where you've got to say, well, how able are you to cooperate with your neighbors to weather power outages and food outages and things like that?
Mm. Yeah, well, that's that resilience, isn't it?
Yeah, build some
Yeah.
resilience,
And we
populate
have
the
we
political parties, like New Zealanders, whichever one you join. I'm not being partisan here. Join them and give us better candidates to vote for so we're not so completely disinterested in the whole thing.
Yes. Well, and that trust, isn't it? The fabric of society and trust, and the trust that we have in our politicians was actually, it was somewhere that the interview that I did with Elizabeth Rata headed, funnily enough.
I've had that on my to watch list. Was it a good chat?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, she's incredible, but um, she doesn't often deviate off the conversation much, but she had a lot that she was thinking about, and we ended up heading into that social contract that we
Yeah.
have as a nation. And
The
of course,
high trust
education
society.
is, yeah, essential for that.
Yeah,
And
it's better.
she had some really clear thoughts. Heading back to this particular issue, Annie O'Brien just ripped out a really quick opinion on this, which I thought captured the mood of the entire thing perfectly. The immediate framing was emotionally loaded and highly selective from the media. Thousands of jobs were said to be on the chopping block, with public servants sacrificed, frontline services under threat. Well, none of those are the case. And Wellington devastated. Wellington devastated. I saw that too. And again, Wellington has been devastated by the stay-at-home policies and Labor allowing this very highly paid six-figure plus on average, or just shy of, sector of public servants, of which most of them are in Wellington, to be able to, pop back up to the beach house on the Kapiti Coast. So that I mean, I do actually feel for Nicola Willis. We're coming up to the budget. I mean, she has got the shit sandwiches of all shit sandwiches. There will be no making of silk purses out of sow's ears with her, with this budget. We'll be lucky if we get a burlap sack, and a wet one at that. That's what we'll get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easier to, if you've got the choice between spending money on a credit card and being hungry, you spend money on the credit card. And there is that kind of childlike tendency to think, well, it's just some rich pricks who've got more money than they need to pay for it. Again, it's that everything bad that happens to me is someone else's fault. I've said this before, I'm sure, but I think it's quite apt. When you get unfit and you kind of stop exercising and you get out of shape and you think, well, right, I've got to get going. Like, this is no way to live. And so you start exercising, you go to the gym or you go for a run or you go for a walk, whatever. There's a little voice inside your head that's highly resistant to that. It says, this is why are we having to conform to other people's beauty standards? Well, we could be sitting in bed watching Netflix. It would be better. That voice, that whingy little voice that you need to understand is your enemy to improve yourself, has political representation in Quithy Hipkins. He's the representative of that voice. And,
Yeah. I just want to quickly divert before we jump off politics to the energy summit that was held in Queenstown over the weekend. And it was attended by a panel of essentially the energy spokespeople for the current parties in government. And Keely Wong, why she was there from Opportunity, I have really no idea. But however, I guess the Opportunity Party are trying to position themselves as the teal party of New Zealand, and someone obviously...
they want to be sensible, right?
Yeah. So,
Or sound
but
sensible.
I mean, at best polling, I think they've been, I mean, she's currently the darling of, she's the shiny new political thing. But at best, 3%. She's looking at getting over the threshold. Yeah, well, good luck with her on that. However, they had the Electrify Queenstown conference. First major debate. So you had Megan Woods was there for Labour. You had activist David Seymour there. Shane Jones for New Zealand First. Chloe was there. Yes, speaking of sort of perky eyebrows from Chris, you had very furrowed monobrow from Chloe.
Bushy.
And this Keely Wong was there with Patrick Gower as MC. I'm sure everybody was just super excited about that. And of course, and Simeon Brown from National. The biggest thing that came out of this for me was two things. One, whilst all parties talked about sort of their policies and their plans of what it is that they want to do, and none of them appeared to agree on anything, really. The one party that was the exception in this was Labour, who didn't have anything that they could talk about because for some reason, what they want to campaign on for this upcoming election seems to be some great, massive secret. I don't think they figured out how kind of elections work, or I don't know.
You can imagine at some point there was the same whiteboard moment where someone wrote 100,000 homes on a whiteboard, and this year it's explaining is losing.
Yeah.
Someone's done that.
Yeah, potentially. But the reason I looked at this story, and it was Derek Cheng in the Herald was the one that I looked at, was because of what you discussed last week with Richard Prebble, saying that energy is the issue of the election.
It really
so
is.
Here you are with, actually, Te Pāti Māori weren't there. Anywho, so maybe that's why Keely was there, because TPM went there. Anywho, so here you are. You have 5 of the 6 parties that are in the tent. 4 of them were up there saying, well, this is our vision for energy. So you've got Shane talking about sort of fast tracking and, devolving some stuff with gentailers. Apparently there was a moment there where there was some agreement across the party benches, and there was a little bit of a chuckle there and all this sort of stuff. They're all there saying this is who we are, this is what we believe. And then you've got Labour saying, sweet bugger all. It was, yeah, It's almost like they don't quite get the memo. Really?
Explaining is losing.
Yeah. 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 So that was definitely something that was I just sort of thought was intriguing because what concerns me, of course, is the lack of consensus amongst all parties involved in terms of energy, because energy in this country is far too high. And if they can't be agreeing on where they're at now in this whole sort of cut and thrust and debate phase, Lord only knows where they're going to be
Well,
once,
I mean,
regardless
that's
of
all.
what size start negotiating coalitions.
Yeah, I mean, they've said if this government sets up favourable conditions for New Zealand to use its own energy resources, we're going to shut it down. So there's not a lot of wiggle room with that.
No.
You can say, hey, whatever you do, we're going to crap on it, and we're going to pretend that windmills and solar can serve New Zealand's power needs. Chloe's great for this, isn't she? She says, solar. And solar is good. It's a useful addition to certain areas where people maybe it's not practical to connect to the grid or whatever. But in all of those things, in the windmills, you need base load power. And at the moment, the only game in town is fossil fuels, or if we weren't compromised by promising Russia that we'd be nuclear free, it might be nuclear.
Mm.
But yeah, I think, and we had a bit of a chat the other day with the various people in RCR, and I think we should pick up Richard Preble's challenge and run with it. This should be about people's power bills halving. How do we do that? How do we halve Kiwis' power bills? How do we make it so they can, without tanking property prices necessarily, how can you have somewhere to live that, is going to be half the cost it is currently? You know, the Labour Party at the last, during the last term, made all of these uh, state houses, and they're triple glazed. You don't need to do that.
Mm.
You'd be far better making twice as many homes, and maybe they don't even last as long, but they provide shelter while people are
Getting back on
getting
their
on their
feet.
feet,
Yeah.
and they can get some money together. And it's the burden of the state.
Mm. Derek, I think, summarised the end of this article beautifully. He said it's not surprising there isn't stronger political consensus in the energy space. They're different parties. They're meant to have different ideas on how to improve energy prices. Multiple reports over the years, however, have lamented how governments undo what the previous government did, and how short-termism and the lack of bipartisanship have hindered long-term planning in critical sectors like energy. Any voters watching would be forgiven for thinking there wasn't much on display to convince them that their power prices were starting to fall. And I think he's quite right. And the reality of it is when you've got this fixation on climate change, uh, it's not
Later.
going to come right, is it?
No, and when you've got a fixation on equality, and you tell some of these Labour voting ladies, hey, your opinion is just as valid as the next person, you get a lot of people who, if they were living in a medieval village, their contribution would be hoeing turnips, just putting their oar in and just repeating what they're hearing Paddy Gower say, or what they're hearing. And yeah, I mean, we're 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 in a difficult situation, and it's that old canoeing thing. If you've ever canoed down white water, there's this counterintuitive thing you have to do, where you've got to paddle towards what you really don't want to go towards as fast as you can, because that gives you maneuverability. And the whole, oh, we're going to just cut the amount of energy we're using, is the equivalent of just being pulled along by events. And not having the maneuverability to actually sort of do things.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's almost like this, uh, we can't help but to self-sabotage, isn't it? It's a political self-sabotage almost.
Well, we're being told that some people are fabulously rich because we're not rich. And, whether it was James Shaw, Chloe Swarbrick, the wealth's out there. We've just got to take it.
Mm,
It's that, thing that Stalin told told the proletariat to encourage them to murder the kulaks in Ukraine. And yeah, I mean, if always you have to get back to the heart of it, we're a very Marxist culture at this point. It's
mm,
replaced Christianity, but it's no less a religion.
mm. Now, one story that actually we have been covering right from the very beginning of Media Matters, and we've been tracking all the way along, has been the fertility rate. And this week there were three stories: one dropped in Stuff, one dropped in the New Zealand Herald, and one dropped in RNZ. From the data out from Stats New Zealand this week, that New Zealand's fertility rate fell again to 1.53 births from, I think, 1.56. So it has dropped again. The fertility rate is well below the 2.1 replacement that we need. In the year ending June 2024, only 57,000 births were registered and were identified in New Zealand. Births declined despite a 3% increase in women aged between 15 and 49. So what that says
Despite them
is,
what?
pardon?
Births decline despite what?
A 3% increase in women
Right.
aged between 15 and 49. So what that then says is that the childless number, the people not having children, I think potentially is that confounding factor. Now, there's lots of different analysis at why this is the case, and I've mentioned the Birthgap documentary. There's also, I found a website which actually is essentially a fact check against the Birthgap documentary, but the one thing is key, and it doesn't matter which one of these things that I look at. Essentially, girls are crossing their legs. They just don't want to have babies.
Well, they're not necessarily crossing the legs often, you know. There's the 18,000 kids that we're aborting each year. And there's the sex ed that likes telling 13-year-old girls about the importance of using lube during anal sex rather than what sort of man you want to look for to be a good father or husband and how a healthy marriage looks. We don't teach them that.
Mm.
In that story, I mean, I'm just looking at the Stuff story. Um, you know what they missed? What wasn't in the story was in 2018, because it was saying, despite the drop in registered births, the infant mortality rate showed an improvement. So that's some good news, Busky. The rate fell to 5.2 deaths from 1,000 live births, down from 6.0 deaths per 1,000 live births in the year ended March 2025. But what's not in the story is that in 2018, the infant mortality rate in New Zealand was 3.8 deaths per 1,000 live births, a significant decrease from both of those figures. And the rate is among, it was saying the rate is, at that point was among the lowest recorded for both the total and Māori populations comparable to other OECD nations. But that's still, that the one that they're celebrating is still a 38.6% increase. And they're saying it's an improvement on what was a 58% increase on infant mortality between 2018 to March 2026. How have they
Mm.
missed that?
Mm.
A 58% increase in infant mortality. Isn't that the story?
Yeah, and actually, there was the big stories just revolving around this morning that I've heard and last night as well was around using. They keep calling them pods, baby. What happened to the word bassinet? Why doesn't anyone use bassinet anymore? Am I just being old and
Probably.
fusty? Uh, must be. But anyway, they were talking about these sleeping pods for babies and the risks posed with that. And I've seen a number of stories too in terms of SIDS and the number of children that are passing away after SIDS and in these pods and how you're placing baby to sleep as being one of the confounding factors. Now, SIDS is, I think, one of those most unknown conditions, devastating, devastating if you've ever been in the situation with that for a family, which our family has. And they're still trying to figure it out, what are the causes. But in terms of infant mortality, we've seen definite changes in that pr- perinatal and postnatal. And there's so many elephants in that room, and yet, they'll look at things like sleeping pods and whether you swaddle or not swaddle, or lay baby on its back or baby on its front, or is co-sleeping involved. Whereas anything that looks remotely medical or intervention that you give the child, no, we can't go there.
Yeah. There's a peak around the time when we vaccinate people of sudden infant death. So, it's coincidental. I had a GP say that to me once. There is a peak of SIDS around, it's sort of coincidental around the time we vaccinate.
Yeah. I actually pulled it. So again, this other website that supposedly counteracts in their belief, and it's a number of academics and various bits and bobs, but it's still nonetheless it's still addressing the issues in the room. One of them was, is childlessness the cause of declining fertility rates? Now, Stephen Shaw in Birthgap, he says there is no trend towards smaller families. People who do not become parents are as likely to go on to have 2, 3, 4 or more children as decades ago. It's about having that very first child when childlessness has exploded. Now, the fact checkers, according to their research, they've come out and they say, well, according to them, the reality is evidence shows that there's a strong trend towards smaller families that comes with the combination of female empowerment, education, access to contraception, and women's participation in the labour force. Declining fertility is the result of a trend in delayed parenthood and smaller family sizes in many countries, including trends of increasing childlessness in some countries, whether by choice or circumstance. There is no evidence supporting the claims that no more than half the women during 30 without a child would ever become mothers, or the explosion of childlessness anywhere. However, when I dug deeper into the report, they also looked at those who are actually not having the children and why they're not having the children. And there were two studies that jumped out. One was from Pew Research, who's basically said 56% of people just were like, nah, not for me, even though they could. No, didn't want to have kids, and that was in 2021. Michigan State University, they went on and they actually had data very similar to a CDC study, which was done between covering stats between '06 and 2012, that 72% in the CDC and 74% in the Michigan State study, essentially of those choosing not to have children, 3/4 of them basically were just like, yeah, nah, just don't want to.
I mean, it's one of those things where I'm not interested in denigrating people who don't want to have kids, and I feel really bad talking about the joy of having children around people who haven't had them, because people don't have them for all sorts of reasons. Often people from very big families choose not to have them. But what I feel inclined to do is to think as a patriotic New Zealander, I would like to create a community where people who want to have kids can have kids. Like, I would like to live in a village again, basically. And I would like them to have a lot of kids, and I would like those kids to be happy. And reach their potential. I would like those children to be optimally raised, and I see that as the overarching priority for this country. We talk about this a lot. There's this, if you pass laws and then you're like the Green Party ladies going, yes, where you can kill children up to before the moment of birth. How are you going to prioritize women not smoking meth during pregnancy or drinking booze or smoking in a way that absolutely just snips off the potential of their children to be what they could be? It's interesting as well. You sent me another, you sent me a couple of articles on this. You obviously, there were quite a few of them there trying to explain away the whole people not wanting to have kids. But there was a story about in Radio New Zealand News about Danny Duncan, who has built a large social media following by documenting her decision to live child-free. Duncan told Radio New Zealand's Morning Report, many women now realise there's a choice and are choosing themselves, especially in tough economic times. There is a lot that you sacrifice and give up when you become a mother. How would you know? You've never had kids. And we know that a lot of mothers are not supported well. Financially, the world is really hard for people these days. So I think people realize they can't have it all. And I think it's really awesome that they get to choose themselves. Narcissism. For Duncan, so this just makes alive everything she said. For Duncan, the decision not to be a mother wasn't based on money. Even if the world was set up perfectly for me to be a mother, I still wouldn't choose to be one. It's not something I personally desire to do. And I'd say, fine, snip your family line that goes back thousands and thousands of years. Decide that it stops if you want to. Maybe if you don't want to be a mother to that extent, maybe you shouldn't be one. I really wanted to be a father. I really wanted to have kids. And as a consequence, I've worked my hardest to be a good father and raise children who reach their potential. The things I noticed about that story is there's not even a token effort to meet the requirement for balance in the story that Radio New Zealand's charter demands. Where are the women who regret not having children? Because that's a thing. Where's the perspective of the joy of having children? Because a lot of people, you can make having children sound bad to someone who doesn't have children. Oh, I was up at 3:00 changing a shitty nappy. But really, there's joy in doing the most important thing. If your child's lying in its own poo, there's a joy in cleaning it up. Go, there you go, buddy. And if you go to the Others Club website, which is what this lady set up, there's a photo which is kind of, and it's a bunch of young women who still smell of hope in a bar or restaurant, drinking booze and laughing with their mouths wide open in the way you do when you drink booze, just having a grand old time. And the message kind of is, this is what you'd miss out on drinking piss with your mates and wastefully spending money on yourself. It's, again, a bit of maturity would have been good in that story, a bit of balance, a bit of, hey, do we want to survive?
And taking it also too back to the fabric of society as well, is that part of that fabric is, getting involved in things where you're not paid for. So volunteerism, whether that be the form of sports or charity organisations or business organisations that do great works. Without those organisations, we would not have a fantastic functioning society. Some of them religious, some are non-religious, some are, family-based, whatever it is. Having children is often the gateway for you to get that experience as being part of your community, to give up of your own time for something much greater in the community in which you live. And that's one of the things that I think that gets lost. It's not just necessarily having the joy of having a family, but you lose that connection as well if you don't go out and actively look at it. I mean, I know, and I've got a number of people in my life that haven't had children for one reason or t'other, but and they fall into two very distinct groups. Those that just simply don't like children, don't want to have children, want to concentrate on them, either themselves individually or their marriage, have absolutely zero interest. And then there's a second group. Who whether or not it be by choice or not, but they still really want to be part of their extended family lives and actually throw themselves into that and are very active, as aunts or uncles or nieces or with friends and still get involved. So they still get the advantage, a great advantage. So they're still very much part of a community. It's that first group that I worry about, because it's that first group as that sort of down this luxury belief pathway of it's all about me, that's fine for now. But what
Yeah, the
about
young woman
30
in
or
the
40,
bar that's in the photo.
30 or 40 years from now? Yeah. I just found
Mm.
it very, very interesting that the three of the major outlets picked that one up off a basic set of stats, because it's obviously something in those newsrooms, because there'll be a portion of journalists in those newsrooms that are in this situation that sort of
A
tweaked
portion,
something.
it's most of them. It's
Oh,
most of them are alcoholic 20-something ladies.
yeah.
That's what they're doing. It's like how during COVID, you had all these stories about hairdressers and cafes because that's where they were going, and they're hopelessly incapable of objectivity. Right.
Mm.
Sorry.
Yeah. Right. Before we jump into things further afield, you did also look at a couple of your key opinion pieces before we head there. Give us a quick summary on those.
Good old Richard Prebble. Well, for some reason, I've always liked Richard Prebble. I think he genuinely is a well-meaning man, and he's very sharp. And if you read, I read a lot of his books because there are a lot of them in secondhand bookshops. Into the Red is a very interesting one where he talks about how out of the red, I think, sorry, not Into the Red. He talks about how they inherited this mess and got a really competent group of people, a really solid plan to clean it up. But as I've said before, there are things about those baby boomer intellectuals that really they got trained to think of Christianity as hopelessly passé. And so they don't factor in evil. It's all market forces for them. But in this particular, um, in this one, he was talking about how Act's proposed immigration crackdown misses the root cause of New Zealand's work and welfare woes. And he was saying the immigration is being held up as a symptom, but actually as a cause of our problems, but it's actually a symptom. Um, he was saying employers still cannot fill jobs in aged care, horticulture, hospitality, tourism, and agriculture. We spend billions on education. After a minimum of 12,500 hours of taxpayer-funded schooling, thousands of pupils leave school without the basic literacy and numeracy for a modern economy. Around 1 in 8 school leavers are not in employment, education, or training. It's hard to learn if you do not attend school, and this is the nub of it. Despite an improvement in attendance, too many schools have chronic absentee rates. The lesson too many students learn is that attendance is optional. It is hardly surprising some carry that attitude into working life. And that is so true. Work is a habit. Like any habit, it must be formed early. And I've planted trees hopelessly unfit or reasonably unfit, and I've planted trees fit. It's night and day. If you are work fit, you get so much done. If you're not, work is misery. He's saying New Zealand is not producing enough work-ready citizens. When we include superannuation, the number on taxpayer funding is increasing. We have drifted into becoming a country that imports temporary migrants to do the work while allowing able-bodied adults to remain on a benefit. Yeah, dead right, Richard. The other one I looked at was Matthew Hooton. He was so mean to Christopher Luxon. I've been pretty mean to him as well, because I don't, you know. But Matthew Hooton was lauded by Matthew Hooton lauded Christopher Luxon. He wrote a story. Christopher Luxon dropped slogans for hard truths on security, debt, and immigration. And this, he was talking about how in the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer's efforts to salvage his position was a disaster, serving up political waffle voters now so loath, prompting nearly 100 Labour MPs to demand he resign. In contrast, Christopher Luxon's speech to Business NZ in Auckland was outstanding. Now, if you think back to how he was really trying to push him out the door, that's quite a turnaround. And I think probably Rachel Smalley's helping him. Maybe she said to him, hey, look, you're not charming. You're not that likable. People want you in there as a bit of the machinery that's competent. Focus on that. I think that's what he's done. The Prime Minister has finally delivered a statement on the global outlook and the challenges it represents worthy of his office. It was perhaps the most honest, realistic, and substantive prime ministerial statement since the era of sloganeering began 20 years ago. Conventional wisdom says it would take a Labour government to step up a third time. I've got to cut that in. So it's a bit of a non sequitur. Embracing the latest intellectual waka to navigate New Zealand to a new era. For 90 years, National's role has mainly been to conserve and build on whatever new ideas Labour's governments brought forth. However, today's Labour, controlled not only by workers, controlled not by workers, but by comfortable Greyland Liberals and Wellington's overpaid professional managerial class, prefers its do-nothing, small target strategy, hoping to resurrect the failed Ardern-Hipkins regime. Luxon correctly reflected Labour's contribution to the current discourse by not mentioning them at all.
Yeah.
So,
do you think that this is the Smalley effect?
Yeah, I do. I think she's just elbowed aside a lot of 20-something PR chicks and said, look, you're not giving ladies the tingles. And when you try to give them the tingles, it's just creepy. Be competent. Just concentrate on that. That competence gives us the tingles a bit.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see how, if this is just the beginning, heading into the election season, that this actually continues from him.
Whether they've timed it like this to kind of bring some good news and, ignore Chris Hipkins, ignoring the actual issues and not giving any policy.
Yeah,
I think people are horrified, generally. They could always do things better in terms of talking about that. Look, the Marxist student politicians spanked the credit card, and now we not only don't have that credit to spend, we've got to pay back the money he pissed up against the wall, or they pissed up against.
And with this energy stuff, it was one of the things that he brought up, and he's repeated it several times. He said, we are taking some of the learnings from the COVID era and the pro-inflationary short-term effects of applying relief and where this takes New Zealand long term. And this is in particularly the dropping of the excise tax, on fuel. And he's been very stoutly against that, and he hasn't done it. And that is why. And I sort of thought, okay, that's because usually he will sort of shy away from anything like that, and he hasn't. So yeah, I think I agree. I think it is the Smalley effect. I think she is having a positive effect on how he communicates, what he communicates, and that the ditheriness that he's often had, because when he's on the hoof, he's not great. When he's prepared, he's much, much better. But I think she's working with him, and with any luck, he will get a greater clarity about his communications. So then people can look at it, assess it, and then when they're going to make a decision to where their vote goes, they're doing it with eyes wide open.
Yeah, I think he would almost do well to acknowledge his inherent unlikability.
Mm.
Oh, I know I look like a pig that's pressed for the hungy, but I've got to fix things up, and I've got a track record of being able to do that. So,
Mm.
I'm not spending that much money on all that sort of Jacinda Ardern stuff. But things are better now than they were.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that didn't appear, well, not that I could find it particularly obviously, was there was another rally in London over the weekend, another Unite the Kingdom rally, with the group organised by Tommy Robinson. Very little. In fact, to the point that even though I sort of do stay across a lot of alternative media, even I'd missed it. It was only until I saw it crop up on a few channels that I follow on the weekend that it was on. I mean, this was huge. This is huge. Lots of talk about the potential that Starmer might get rolled. They've been discussing that, but they're not discussing the 60,000 Britons that came out and marched through the middle of London in a show of patriotism and concern about the nation in which they love. Did you take a look at any of that over the weekend?
Yeah, I did. I saw the extent of it. Incredible. And I mean, it's just a matter of who tips into civil war the first. And the best predictor of who goes into civil war is if you've got a neighboring country who's in civil war. And, the bets are generally on Ireland to be the first one to go, and which means that probably the UK would tip next. But again, it's that jarring understanding that people are having to reach, that those in charge have been willfully acting against the interests of the people who have been voting for them.
Mm. You know what I found really intriguing is I took a little bit of a look between right and left wing sources on this
Mm.
just to see how the whole thing was framed. And again, this is part of the problem, I think. Is this framing? So on the left-leaning sources, mostly the Guardian, Al Jazeera, with a couple of that I looked at. But so we're talking, relatively solid. But there was, that whole thought of far-right nationalism was a big one. Populism got thrown in there a lot. Now, I just want to remind people with populism, because they often talk right wing populism like it's negative. Well, it's almost used as a sort of
Yeah,
a
doing
negative
what
ad
people
hominem.
say they want is like
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean,
against democracy.
just to remind people, a definition of right-wing populism is primarily focuses on cultural, national, and identity divides. So, defined, you're looking at the people. You're looking at the elites, cast in a combination of corrupt political establishments, mainstream media, academia, and globalist institutions who are perceived to be out of touch with traditional values. And there's also a focus on anti-immigration, border security, protectionism, and retaining traditional cultural values. So that is considered the right-wing definition for right-wing populism. Meanwhile, across the fence over on the left-wing populism is often defined as socioeconomic populism, with people defined as through an economic lens, as in working class, marginalised, and the less elites being cast as corporate executive, billionaires, Wall Street, powerful financial institutions that manipulate the system for their own gain. And it focuses on wealth distribution, strengthening labour rights, universal health care, and expanding state benefits and power. So left-wing populism is essentially just a euphemism for Marxism, because that's, when you read the definition. So when you look at the framing from the left-leaning sources, they're looking at it very, very much through that Marxist lens. And The Guardian, there's quotes in there like "prepare for the Battle of Britain," "promoting hatred and division" were some of the things. Al Jazeera, far right stage, a far right rally staged by Tommy Robinson. So they're very much framing it that way. Meanwhile, over with the right wing, they're framing. So I looked at GB News. I actually did look at the New York Post. They tended to be a little bit more in the middle, and then at some of the independent voices. Patriotism, conservatism, Christianity, faith, anger and concern over mass migration, two-tier policing, anti-establishment politics, and again quotes there were we need to keep going, from JD Vance. That was in The Guardian. Biggest patriotic display, proud to be Britons. So that was sort of the framing on the other side. When it comes to the social fabric, Marty, I look at what happened in the UK as a canary in the coal mine for what could potentially happen here between the tribalist versus colonial framing that we have in this country. What do you think?
Well, Aristotle said that democracy can only exist within a cultural monoculture where people have kin ties. And I think there is some truth to that. You can, if you really, really band around common values, you can approximate that. But diversity isn't our strength. And I say that as someone who loves all people. But, I haven't been to Japan for a long time, but I loved being there because it was Japan. And it had cultural norms, and I studied what they were and respected them. And at the same time, when I was living in the UK, poor beleaguered Poms would often say to me, "Oh, I guess the weather's not very nice." And I used to say, I love being here. It's so awesome to be in a place where I can drive on a road that was once a Roman road, and I can see all this stuff that's so old that we don't have in New Zealand. It's great. And you'd see them visibly relax because they're so used to people saying, "Your country sucks." And it's kind of like, well, then go away.
Yeah. We've just had a friend just get back from a couple of months in Europe and the UK visiting his daughter. And as he said, he went over with exceptionally low expectations. And he said he was really pleasantly surprised at what he saw. Are there problems? Yes. But he said largely it was very much to your point. You embraced what it was about the culture while you were there. And he said, with the exception of Monaco, which he did not enjoy at all, that's where his expectations were actually met. He said everywhere else, and he travelled from the UK, all parts of the UK, across through to Western Europe, old communist bloc, and everything in between, had a fabulous time, absolute fabulous time. So, yeah, he just took it as he saw it. Now, we've got a bit of feedback. Let's go and do that before we head off. For last week, you and Marty are excellent. Never miss listening to you all on RCR, and that's from Maree with an I.
Thank you, Marie.
From Imogen, love you guys. Thank you for doing what you do. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to each week. With all the madness in the world, your voices are a place of comfort and importantly, logic. I really like how you both challenge each other and give different perspectives. And that's from Imogen. Thank you, Imogen.
Is that Imogen in Christchurch? I wonder.
From Jeff, you might appreciate this. He sent you a YouTube link. Did you get a chance to take a look at that, Marty?
I haven't looked at it, but I will.
And thanks to everybody. And there was also some other great stuff. I'm going to do another separate mailbag because there's a lot of other bits and pieces, particularly about Elizabeth Rata on there. So thank you to everyone that sent in mail. 2057 is the text. Inbox at rcr.media is the email. As this comes out, I would have just done a webinar with Alistair, a 360 Unplugged. Make sure you do check that out. We're talking and unraveling and doing some preparation ahead of Council Watch the following week, which I'll be doing with Catherine Ennis-Carter around climate modelling, and actually everything is starting to unravel. So that should be great news and fun. That's sort of pretty much me. What are you looking out to for the week, Marty? What's going to set your world on fire this week?
Well, got to take some olives up to Auckland because my poor old olive processor here in Tauranga has, I think, hit the wall with his. He's given up for the season unexpectedly and suddenly. So there's still a lot of good fruit here. I've got to go out and get it. That's my main focus. Got a few carpets to clean, and yeah, pretty much
There
that.
you go. There you go. Well, thank you everybody for joining us again for another week. We'll do it all again next week here with Media Matters on RCR. Thanks, Marty.
Keep up the great work, Maree. Have a great week, everyone.